The night sky over Earth was not dark anymore. It glowed red, as if the heavens themselves were burning. From orbit, entire continents shimmered under lines of fire that traced across oceans and cities alike, the light of explosions forming a cruel imitation of dawn. In the great chamber of the Galaxy Council, millions of light-years away, delegates watched in silence as the live feed unfolded before them. Dozens of alien species sat in rows of glass balconies, each face lit by the same color, the crimson of a dying world. No one spoke. No one breathed. On the main display, the last Terran defense grid collapsed above the Atlantic, the shield arcs flickering out like candlelight before a storm. A final transmission appeared for only a moment. The voice of a human general, his face blooded, the sounds of chaos behind him. To any who can hear this, he said, Earth stands, to the end. Then static consumed the feed. The council chamber remained still. The Dravik ambassador, a tall reptilian figure with scales the color of molten glass, slowly stood and bowed slightly to the chancellor. It is done, he said. The death world is neutralized. Across the room, several delegates nodded in agreement. The humans had been trouble from the moment they entered galactic politics. Stubborn, emotional, impossible to control. Their wars had rewritten star maps. Their will had terrified even the old powers. Many had predicted this day would come. Yet now, as Earth burned, there was no satisfaction in the air. Only the heavy quiet of guilt wearing the mask of diplomacy. The Council regrets what has occurred, the Chancellor began, his voice hollow. But the decision was necessary for galactic stability. Cameras hovered around him, recording his every word. Outside the chamber, citizens across the galaxy watched from their own worlds as the human homeworld cracked under orbital bombardment. Some cheered. Most turned their eyes away. Among the council sat Admiral Koro, commander of the Galactic Fleet. His uniform gleamed with silver sigils, his eyes cold and distant. He leaned forward slightly and said, almost to himself, one less death world to threaten the stars. The translator drones carried his words across the chamber, and for a moment, the silence deepened. The Chancellor hesitated, then gave a slow nod. It was the kind of nod that ended civilizations. Outside, the stars shifted as the human signal faded into black. Down on Earth, the cities were already gone. London had vanished under a rain of plasma. New York burned where the ocean met flame. Tokyo was silent beneath clouds of smoke. In the ruins of Moscow, a small group of soldiers stood beside a crumbling wall, their armor scorched, their faces streaked with ash. Above them, the sky bled fire. They said the council would help us. One whispered, his voice breaking. No one answered. Somewhere far below the surface, in the underground bunkers carved into mountain stone, families huddled together as the power flickered and died. Mothers pressed their children close, whispering lullabies that could no longer hide the tremor in their voices. Fathers stood in silence, listening to the distant rumble of the world ending above them. The air smelled of dust and smoke and fear. In one bunker, an old scientist named Dr. Hale stared at the cracked monitor in front of him. The signal from the orbital array had gone dead. He could see nothing now, only static. His assistant looked at him with wide eyes. "Is it over?" she asked. He didn't answer. He simply closed his eyes. "Not yet," he said quietly. "Not if the Vanguard made it." She didn't understand, but he did. Far beyond the reach of the Council's eyes, hidden deep in the cold darkness of the Oort cloud, a secret fleet waited. The last hope of humanity, thousands of ships built in silence, unknown even to most of Earth's leaders. They were more than vessels. They were arks. And on them slept the seeds of a future no one yet believed possible. But none of that was visible now. All anyone could see was fire. In the streets of Paris, people ran through falling ash, the Eiffel Tower a burning silhouette against the sky. In Sydney, the ocean boiled at the edges, and the reflection of flames danced across waves that had once been blue. Across every continent, communication lines went dark, and only fragments of desperate messages broke through the static. Calls for help, cries of children, whispered prayers. Satellites fell from orbit like shooting stars. The moon cracked in half where a Dravik missile had struck it, sending a halo of dust across the Earth's atmosphere. And still, the Council watched. Some turned away, unable to bear it. Others stared, cold and expressionless, pretending that this was mercy. "We gave them warnings," said one delegate. "They refused peace. They refused control," another corrected softly. "There's a difference." The Chancellor's voice cut through the murmur. "History will remember this as necessary." But even he didn't sound convinced. In the back rows, young aides whispered that the humans had been working on something. A new form of energy, a weapon, a secret the Council had feared. "Better this way," one alien said under his breath. "Better that their fire dies with them." In the ashes of Chicago, a boy named Adam crawled from the wreckage of a collapsed shelter. He was 10 years old. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with soot. Around him lay the broken remains of his neighborhood. Cars melted into the road, buildings bent into molten steel. He stumbled forward, calling for his mother, his voice raw and small against the roar of distant explosions. He didn't find her. But as he looked up, through the smoke and ruin, he saw something, a streak of silver moving through the clouds. A human evacuation shuttle, engines flickering, rising into the burning sky. He reached out his hand as it disappeared, not knowing that inside that ship slept hundreds of others, frozen in stasis, bound for the dark edges of the solar system. Hours turned into days. The bombardment ended. The flames dimmed. The smoke settled into a gray veil that covered the Earth like mourning cloth. From orbit, the planet looked almost peaceful again, its surface glowing faintly red where cities had once shined with light. The Dravik fleet drifted above, their mission complete. "The Death World is silent," reported the Dravik commander. "Proceed to disengage." Below, the last remaining humans who could still breathe looked up through cracks in the clouds and saw nothing but the faint outlines of enemy ships fading into the void. Some cursed them. Others simply closed their eyes and let the darkness come. In the council chamber, the broadcast ended. The screen faded to black. Delegates began to rise, adjusting their robes, muttering polite condolences, eager to leave. But not everyone moved. At the far end of the hall, Lura, the young historian assigned to record the proceedings, sat frozen at her console. She had watched every frame, every burning city, every falling signal. She felt sick. "Was there no other way?" she whispered. Her superior glanced at her sharply. "History will decide that," he said. But she knew better. History didn't decide anything. People did. And people had just erased a world. That night, the Council's capital world glittered with celebration. Fireworks rose over the skyline, marking the end of the human war. Politicians toasted to peace. Children waved flags under the light of floating drones. In one corner of the galaxy, a civilization had just been murdered, and in another, the victors danced. Yet above the laughter, the stars seemed to burn a little brighter, as if the universe itself had refused to forget. Far beyond those stars, past the orbit of Pluto, the hidden fleet remained. Inside the lead ship, TNS Revenant, Admiral Mason stood before a viewport, watching the faint light of a dying sun. His reflection stared back at him, tired, haunted, but alive. Behind him, rows of cryopods lined the walls, each one containing a sleeping human face. He turned to his officer. "Any word from Earth?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The officer shook his head. "All signals lost, sir." Mason nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "Then Earth stands in memory." He looked back at the stars. "They think we're gone," he said quietly. "Let them. They'll never see us coming." The engines of the fleet hummed softly, a low song of survival. Thousands of ships drifted in silence, their hulls dark to avoid detection, their cores burning with power drawn from captured asteroids. Within the command center, engineers worked without speaking, faces lit by the glow of holographic maps. They had one goal: rebuild, rearm, return. The fleet's motto was etched into the steel above the main deck: "From the ashes, we endure." Back on the council world, Lura couldn't sleep. The images of Earth's final moments haunted her. She replayed the broadcast again and again, looking for something, a detail, a pattern, a sign that it hadn't been final. Then, deep within the static of the final transmission, she heard it, faint, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. She magnified the sound, isolating the pattern. It wasn't random. It was coded. A message in old Terran Morse. 3 words repeated over and over, "We are coming." She froze, her blood running cold. "It can't be," she whispered. But it was. The next morning, as dawn rose over the Council's marble towers, Lura submitted her report. Her superiors dismissed it instantly. "A glitch," they said. "Echoes from the debris field." She didn't argue, but she didn't delete it either. She copied the file, hid it in a private archive, and sealed it under her name. Somewhere inside her, a small ember of fear, or perhaps hope, began to burn. On the far edge of the solar system, Admiral Mason stared at a hologram of the Galaxy Council, the same image that had shown Earth's destruction. "You watched us burn," he said softly. "Now you'll watch us rise." His second-in-command looked at him uncertainly. "When do we strike?" Mason turned toward the stars. "Not yet," he said. "They think the fire ended. Let them rest in their illusion. The longer they forget us, the stronger we become." He walked across the bridge, the low light casting shadows across the faces of his crew. These were not soldiers anymore. They were the last chapter of a story the galaxy believed had ended. But they knew better. Humanity had always been the species that refused extinction. They had lived through ice ages, wars, and plagues. They had built fire from stone, cities from dust, empires from ruins. And now, from the ashes of their own world, they would build something greater still. The camera of history pulled back, showing the vast silence of space. Earth was now a dim red ember behind them, a memory carved into eternity. The Council had written humanity's epitaph, but in the black between stars, a heartbeat still echoed, strong, patient, relentless. The fire that had consumed Earth had not killed humanity. It had tempered them. And one day, when the stars least expected it, the fire would return. The stars beyond Neptune burned faintly, distant and cold, untouched by the light of dying Earth. Out here, in the darkness beyond the solar system, silence ruled. It was a silence deeper than death. No radio waves, no transmissions, no flicker of human presence. And yet, hidden beneath the black veil of the Oort cloud, something vast and alive drifted slowly between the shadows. 1,000 ships, their hulls coated in asteroid dust to hide their signatures, moved as one. They did not shine. They did not call out. They waited. This was humanity's last secret, the Terran vanguard. The last heartbeat of a world the galaxy had just pronounced dead. Inside those ships slept millions of people. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, children, all in cryogenic stasis, kept alive by machines older than their memories. Every heartbeat of the sleeping echoed faintly through the hulls, a rhythm of survival pulsing through the void. And at the center of it all stood Admiral Mason. He had not slept in 3 days. He stood at the observation deck of the TNS Revenant, his eyes fixed on the faint glow of the distant sun, now no brighter than a dying ember. The silence around him was heavy, the kind that carried ghosts. His reflection in the glass looked older than his years, lines etched deep from grief and duty. "How long until the Council stops watching?" he asked quietly. The voice of his first officer, Commander Ellis, came from behind him, low and steady. "Our scans show no active patrols in this sector. The Dravik fleets withdrew after the bombardment. The Council believes it's over." Mason nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Then they've made their second mistake." He turned toward the main bridge, where holographic maps floated above the consoles. Dotted red lights marked what was once Earth's defense network. All gone. The only green light left pulsed from the Vanguard fleet itself, deep in hiding. "Report on the refugee arcs," Mason said. A young ensign looked up from her terminal. "All 12 are stable, sir. Cryo systems holding at 98% efficiency. Power reserve steady." Mason studied the display for a long moment. 12 arcs. 12 worlds in waiting. He remembered their launch, the chaos, the screaming, the desperate rush to board as the atmosphere cracked under orbital fire. He remembered the faces, families torn apart, soldiers dying to buy them time. Humanity hadn't left Earth by choice. They were thrown into the stars by fire. And that fire still burned inside them. In the lower decks, technicians worked in silence among endless rows of cryopods. Blue light shimmered across sleeping faces. A woman named Dr. Lena Hart moved between the pods, checking vital signs. Her hand lingered on one pod longer than the others. Inside it, a young girl no older than 10 slept peacefully, a stuffed toy clutched to her chest. Lena whispered softly, "You'll see a new sky, little one. I promise." Her voice trembled as she moved on. Every life inside those pods was a promise, a fragment of humanity preserved against extinction. Above her, in the command center, Mason studied the Council's last transmission again. The image of Earth burning filled the screen. He had watched it 100 times, but he couldn't stop. Not out of pain, but out of purpose. "They think we're gone," he murmured. "Let them write their histories. Let them build their statues. We'll give them something real to remember." His words weren't loud, but they carried through the bridge like a quiet vow. Commander Ellis watched him carefully. "Sir, the crew's restless," he said. "They need to know what comes next." Mason looked up, his eyes cold but steady. "What comes next?" he repeated softly. "We build." The fleet had been designed for survival, not war. But humanity had never been good at staying still. Within the dark corridors of the Revenant and her sister ships, engineers and scientists began to work. They scavenged asteroids, melted their cores for materials, reforged hull plating, and began building new vessels, sleeker, faster, stronger. They weren't building colonies. They were building vengeance disguised as hope. Every bolt, every weld, every recalibrated reactor carried the memory of what had been lost. The noise of machinery filled the silence of space, soft but unrelenting, the hum of a species rebuilding itself in exile. Months passed. The fleet expanded deeper into the Oort cloud, spreading out to create hidden construction yards camouflaged among frozen rocks. Drones mined ice for water, metals for hulls, radiation for energy. Children born aboard the fleet grew up never having seen Earth, but they learned about it every day. In the classrooms of Arc 7, teachers spoke softly about oceans and forests, about sunlight that warmed skin and air that smelled of rain. They showed images, green valleys, blue horizons, and the children listened with quiet awe, as if hearing a fairy tale. "We'll go back someday," one boy said once. His teacher smiled sadly. "Yes," she whispered, "but not to the same Earth. To something new." In his private quarters, Mason wrote a message each night, a log entry he never transmitted. He spoke to the ghosts of the past, to those who had died on the surface, to the ones who had stayed behind so others could escape. "We're alive," he whispered one night. "We're still here. You didn't die for nothing." His hand trembled as he reached for the recording switch, but he never sent the message. Maybe he believed they didn't need to hear it. Maybe he was speaking only to himself. On the edge of the fleet, a massive structure began to take shape, a ship unlike any other. It was built from asteroid fragments and pieces of destroyed satellites, its core powered by a captured singularity. The engineers called it Project Exodus. When complete, it would be the heart of humanity's return, a vessel capable of traveling between stars undetected. "She'll be our new Earth," Dr. Hart said when Mason inspected it. "Not a planet, but a home." Mason nodded, running his hand along the cold metal. "Then make her strong enough to carry our ghosts." The days turned into years measured by star charts and orbit cycles. The galaxy forgot them. The Council celebrated its peace. The Dravic Empire expanded into the ruins of human colonies, turning them into mining worlds. History began to rewrite itself, calling Earth's fall a tragic necessity. Only Lura, the historian on the Council world, still listened to the static between transmissions. Sometimes she heard things, a faint heartbeat, a pattern in the noise. She knew what it meant, even if she could never prove it. They are still out there, she whispered to herself. They are watching. Then one day, a signal came through the dark. Faint. Steady. Old Terran code. It was a single word, ready. On the Revenant's bridge, alarms chimed softly as the message appeared on Mason's console. He stared at it for a long moment. How long has it been? He asked. Ellis checked the records. 6 years, 3 months, 12 days since the fall, sir. Mason nodded. Then it's time. He stood, his posture straightening, his voice calm but filled with a quiet strength that made every crew member on the bridge look up. Activate the fleet, he ordered. Wake the sleepers. Begin Phase 1. Throughout the arcs, the cryopods hissed open. Faces that hadn't aged in years blinked in confusion, their breath fogging the cold air. Children cried. Parents wept. Soldiers stood tall, saluting old flags draped across bulkheads. For the first time since Earth burned, humanity's voice filled the void again, not in fear, but in unity. On every ship, one phrase echoed through the intercoms, Earth stands. It wasn't a statement of fact. It was a declaration of will. As the fleet powered up, the dark engines of the Revenant came to life, their light swallowing the black around them. From a distance, it looked like a sunrise blooming in the farthest reaches of space. Mason stood at the viewport, watching the light grow. The Council will feel this, Ellis said quietly beside him. Mason nodded. They already do, he replied. Back on the Council world, Lura woke in the middle of the night to an alert flashing across her data screen. It was a transmission, faint, untraceable, coming from deep beyond the edge of known space. The same voice she'd once heard through static whispered again, stronger this time. We are coming home. Her hands trembled as she saved the recording. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing, the Council's peace had just ended. And out there, in the endless dark, humanity moved again. The Terran vanguard no longer drifted in silence. They had waited, they had endured, and now, with the patience of a dying star rekindling its flame, they began their march back toward the galaxy that had watched them burn. The engines of the fleet roared softly to life, shaking the silence of centuries. Above them, the stars seemed to lean closer, as if the universe itself was listening. Humanity was not gone. Humanity was not broken. Humanity had simply gone quiet, until it was ready to be heard again. The Galactic Council tower stood like a shining spear over the clouds of Concordia Prime, its spires glimmering gold beneath the twin suns. Inside its vast marble halls, the great species of the galaxy gathered in triumph. Newsfeeds streamed across every wall, each headline proclaiming the same hollow victory: the human war is over. The Dravic delegation strutted through the corridors like conquerors, their reptilian scales reflecting light like polished glass. Other delegates smiled politely, masking their unease behind diplomacy. Peace had returned, they said, and yet the air inside the council chamber carried a strange tension, an echo of something unspoken, guilt disguised as pride. At the center of the chamber, the Chancellor's dais hovered in the air, surrounded by thousands of glowing data screens. Today, the Chancellor announced, his voice grand and weary, we confirm the end of a conflict that threatened the stability of all known space. Humanity has fallen, and with it, the fires of war have been extinguished. The words were met with applause, but not all hands clapped. Many simply watched the Chancellor, their faces motionless. In one corner sat Lura, the young historian assigned to record the proceedings. She had watched the destruction of Earth in silence. She had heard the faint Morse code whisper from the static, the impossible pulse that said we are coming. And now, as she watched the council applaud its own righteousness, something in her heart twisted. When the Chancellor's speech ended, the delegates began to mingle. Conversations buzzed through the hall like static, talks of trade routes, new colonies, reconstruction of the Dravic border sectors. At last, order returns, one alien said, raising his glass. Without the humans to interfere, the galaxy will finally prosper. A Heskian diplomat, tall and skeletal, nodded slowly. They burned fast, he said, but they always burned too bright. The laughter that followed was quiet, nervous, the kind that dies quickly when shadows pass. Lura turned her gaze to the massive hologram at the chamber's center, a projected map of the galaxy, the Terran systems now marked in gray. Restricted zone, former human territories. The words glowed coldly against the dark backdrop of stars. It felt wrong, like carving a tombstone for something still breathing. She whispered to her mentor, Archivist Talvin, "Why erase their systems? Shouldn't we preserve the record?" Talvin gave her a sharp look. Preserve what? They're gone. The Council decided their history ends here. She hesitated. But what if it doesn't? He sighed, turning away. You're young, Lura. You still believe history belongs to truth. It belongs to power. Outside, banners fluttered in the wind. The streets of Concordia Prime filled with celebration. Children played with holographic fireworks that painted the sky in silver. Vendors sold victory medals cast from fragments of destroyed human satellites, now trophies of triumph. The galaxy wanted to move on, to forget the fear humanity had once inspired. The Deathwalders who had faced extinction a dozen times and still refused to die. But forgetting a species like that was impossible. It lingered like an ache behind the stars. And then, it began. Small reports at first, dismissed as coincidence. A Dravik mining convoy vanished near the Perseus Rift. Then a communication relay in the rim sectors went dark. Then an entire fleet, 37 ships, disappeared without a trace. The Dravik military called it pirates. The Council called it anomalies. But those who looked closely saw the same pattern. Each disappearance followed by an encrypted signal, faint and short-lived, repeating the same phrase in old Terran code, Earth remembers. In the Council chamber, panic brewed beneath the surface. Emergency meetings were held, new committees formed, and endless theories debated. Some said it was a trick by rival empires. Others whispered about ghosts, the idea that humanity had become something else, something unrecognizable. Nonsense, Admiral Koro said in one meeting, his tone dismissive. We erased them. There are no humans left to fear. His confidence silenced the room. But when he left, even he couldn't shake the unease crawling under his skin. Lura worked late that night in the archives, reviewing intercepted transmissions from the border sectors. One in particular caught her attention, a distress signal from a Dravik freighter moments before it vanished. The recording was broken, but the last words chilled her, "They're not pirates. They're..." The transmission cut off with a burst of static. Lura replayed it over and over, trying to clean the audio. And beneath the static, faint but unmistakable, came another sound, a human voice whispering, "For Earth." She froze, her hands trembling over the console. Meanwhile, on the far edge of the galaxy, deep in the frozen dark, the Terran vanguard moved. No longer silent, no longer sleeping. The TNS Revenant led the formation, engines burning a dull red glow against the void. Within its command bridge, Admiral Mason stood before a projection of the galaxy, the Council's heart glowing in the center. "They are celebrating," said Commander Ellis, bitterness in his tone. "They think we're dust." Mason's face remained calm. "Let them. Celebration blinds the arrogant faster than war ever could." His voice was low, measured, each word carved with precision. "They watched us burn. Now they'll watch the fire move." The fleet began its first operations in secret. They targeted abandoned Council listening posts, erasing traces of their presence, replacing them with false data trails. They hacked communication networks, spreading ghost signals that looked like malfunctions. Slowly, humanity's shadow returned to the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as whispers in the dark. A Council patrol near the Vega corridor reported strange readings, ships moving without heat, signals bouncing off gravitational distortions. Stealth tech beyond our design, one captain reported before the line went dead. Back on Concordia Prime, Lura took her findings to Archivist Talvin. "You need to see this," she said, voice shaking. "There are patterns, movements near the rim. Ships no one can track. It's them, sir. The humans." Talvin looked at her with pity. You've been staring at ghosts, Lura. The mind sees what it wants when it can't accept loss. Then explain this, she snapped, playing the decoded message. The old man listened, his eyes narrowing as the faint Morse message repeated. We are coming. The silence after felt heavier than air. Finally, Talvin whispered, if this is real, the council will bury it. Lura's reply was soft but fierce. Then I won't let them. The following week, the council convened again, this time behind closed doors. Panic now replaced pride. The Dravik ambassador slammed his claws against the table. Your reports say our fleets are vanishing, and you call it coincidence. The chancellor remained calm, though sweat glistened on his temples. If the humans did survive, he said slowly, they're few, disorganized. They cannot challenge the council. A senator from the rim leaned forward. And if they can? Silence. The kind that feels alive. Then Admiral Koro stood. If they live, he said, we will finish what we started. But even he hesitated before adding, we'll find them, if they're truly out there. Lura watched the meeting from a hidden feed, her heart racing. They didn't realize it yet, but their arrogance had already doomed them. The humans weren't waiting to be found. They were already here. Across the void, the Terran fleet executed its first retaliation. A Dravik fuel station on the edge of the Orion belt flickered with light, then vanished. The explosion was silent in space, but its light reached the council worlds hours later, shimmering across every communication feed. The message came seconds after, broadcast in every known language, spoken by a calm, human voice. To those who watched our world burn, it said, remember this. We never died. We endured. In the council chamber, screens went dark. The chancellor stood frozen, his throat dry. Who sent that transmission? He demanded. Where did it come from? No one could answer. No trace, no origin, no signal trail. The room filled with fear disguised as confusion. And for the first time in years, the Great Council, once proud, once united, felt something they had long forgotten. Dread. That night, Lura stood on the balcony overlooking the shining city. She looked up at the stars, at the endless sea of light that now felt sharper, more alive. Somewhere out there, she thought, they're watching too. Somewhere out there, humanity breathes again. She whispered the words softly, almost reverently, we are coming. And out in the black, the Terran vanguard drifted through the void like ghosts wrapped in flame. They were patient, disciplined, silent, but their silence was no longer hiding. It was the calm before the storm. Humanity had always been underestimated, always dismissed. But in the stillness between the stars, something ancient had awakened. The will that once carried them through ice ages and wars, the defiance that no empire could kill. The council had mistaken the quiet for extinction. They were wrong. The fire of Earth had not gone out. It was still burning, unseen and waiting, ready to ignite the galaxy once more. The galaxy had begun to whisper again. From the outer colonies to the deep trade lanes, rumors spread faster than light. Ships gone missing, fleets erased, outposts silenced without a single distress call. No survivors. No wreckage. Just silence. The Dravik Empire called it sabotage. The Council called it instability. But no one dared to say the truth aloud. They had seen this pattern before, long ago, when humanity still had a world to call their own. And as those rumors grew, the shadows at the edge of known space deepened until even the stars seemed afraid to shine there. It began at the rim world of Velize 9, a barren mining colony owned by the Dravik. The night shift workers were loading mineral crates when their scanners started to flicker. Static storm, one asked. There's no atmosphere here, another replied. Then the lights went out. For one full minute, nothing but darkness. When the emergency lamps flickered back to life, every orbiting defense satellite was gone. The sky above was empty. The miners sent a distress signal, but it never reached anyone. The next morning, Velize 9 was gone from the network entirely. Wiped clean. In the Galactic Council chamber, panic returned in quiet tones. The Chancellor stared at the holographic display showing expanding circles of red where colonies had vanished. "These are not pirates," he said at last. His voice trembled. The Dravik ambassador slammed a claw against the table. "Then what are they?" Lura watched from her seat in the archives section, her heart pounding. She already knew the answer. The pattern was too perfect, too deliberate. The vanishings formed a trail, a slow spiral heading inward, toward the heart of the galaxy, toward the Council itself. Meanwhile, in the darkness beyond mapped space, the Terran vanguard moved like ghosts among the asteroids. The TNS Revenant glided silently through the black, its engines dimmed to nothing but a cold pulse of light. Inside, Admiral Mason stood before the main viewport, his face lit by the faint reflection of stars. "VLI's 9 confirmed," Commander Ellis said, handing him a data pad. "No survivors. Transmission delayed by 22 minutes before blackout." Mason read the report without expression. "And the Council's reaction?" "Fear," Ellis said simply. Mason gave a thin smile. "Good. Let them feel it." But Mason wasn't a man of cruelty. Every decision he made carried the weight of sorrow. "They watched us burn," he said quietly. "I want them to see what it means to rise from ashes." His officers stood silent, understanding the meaning behind his words. They were not conquerors, they were reminders. Humanity's war was not born from hatred, but from memory. In the engineering bay, Dr. Lena Hart oversaw the activation of the new stealth systems. Giant coils of blackened alloy thrummed with energy, absorbing light itself. "We can fly through their defense grids unseen," she said. Mason nodded. "Not to hide," he replied, "but to choose when we're seen." On her monitor, she displayed a schematic of the next target, a Dravik dreadnought stationed near the Xenthis Nebula. "If we take it intact, the Council will hear their screams," she said grimly. Mason stared at the glowing outline of the ship. "No screams," he said. "Just silence. Silence terrifies them more than blood." Hours later, the fleet approached the nebula. Clouds of blue and silver gas swirled like frozen fire, casting shadows across the hulls. The Revenant led the assault, flanked by smaller cruisers barely detectable on radar. The Dravik dreadnought floated calmly ahead, unaware of the storm approaching. Inside its command deck, the Dravik captain sipped a dark liquid from a crystal glass, bored from patrol duty. The sensors picked up nothing unusual, until suddenly, nothing at all. Every display went dark. "Status," the captain barked. "Systems failing, unknown interference," a crewman shouted. Then, through the static, came a whisper. It wasn't a voice. It was a pattern. 3 short pulses, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. The crew froze. "Who's sending that signal?" the captain demanded. But no one answered. Outside, the dreadnought's sensors finally caught movement, shapes slipping through the nebula like shadows made of steel. Before they could react, their power grid collapsed. Engines died. Communications fell silent. And then, one by one, the lights on the ship flickered out. From the outside, the dreadnought seemed to simply fade. When the nebula cleared, it was gone. Hours later, the Galaxy Council received an emergency feed. The entire chamber fell silent as the holographic image flickered to life. It was the Dravik captain, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. "They are here," he rasped. "Humans." The feed cut off as an unseen force tore through the background. The Council's communication screens went black. And then, across every world, one signal played for exactly 7 seconds. Earth remembers. Lura sat at her console, trembling. The message repeated across every known frequency, even encrypted channels that should have been impossible to breach. It wasn't just a transmission, it was a statement, a ghostly whisper from a species everyone had buried. "How long do you think they've been watching us?" she asked softly. Her superior, Archivist Talvin, didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth was unbearable. In the Council's upper balcony, Admiral Koro clenched his jaw. "They survived," he said bitterly. "Impossible," muttered the Chancellor. "If they were alive, they would have revealed themselves long ago. Koro's expression darkened. No. That's the difference between us and them. We parade power. They wait. Back in the shadows, aboard the Revenant, Mason stood before his officers. Message confirmed on all frequencies, Ellis reported. The Council knows now. Mason's eyes stayed fixed on the hologram of the galaxy. Good, he said softly. Then history starts again. Around him, the bridge crew exchanged glances, their faces illuminated by the glow of the display. They knew what he meant. Humanity had just stepped back into the story the galaxy thought it had ended. In the following days, panic spread. Merchant routes shut down. Border colonies began to fortify their skies. The Dravic Empire accused rival species of betrayal. The Chancellor issued emergency decrees. But none of it mattered. The disappearances continued, deliberate and precise. And wherever the attacks occurred, the same message followed. 3 words that haunted every system. Earth remembers you. Lura became obsessed. She spent sleepless nights tracing the patterns of each event. Every vanishing formed a line, every line connected to another, forming a web of coordinates. When she finished the map, her breath caught. The pattern wasn't random. It was an ancient Terran constellation. Orion, the symbol of hunters. She stared at it for hours, realizing what it meant. Humanity wasn't hiding. They were signaling. They are coming from the dark, she whispered. And they're hunting. Far across the void, the Terran vanguard gathered. Their fleet had doubled, rebuilt from scavenged wrecks and stolen materials. The old human flag, the blue and white emblem of Earth, hung in every command deck. Children born in exile now stood as soldiers, their voices filled with calm conviction. They had never seen their home, but they carried its memory like fire in their veins. In the central war room of the Revenant, Mason activated a projection of the Galaxy Council. The alien faces looked small and fragile in holographic light. They watched, he said quietly. They judged. They decided we were too dangerous to live. But they forgot what made us dangerous. His officers stood silently as he walked forward, stopping beneath the banner of Earth. It wasn't our weapons. It was our will. They've mistaken silence for surrender. He turned to Ellis. Prepare Phase 2, he ordered. We move closer. Sir, Ellis asked, what if they try to talk this time? Mason's expression softened slightly. Then we listen. And if they lie, he paused, his gaze turning to the stars beyond the viewport. We remind them what it means to fear the fire. That night, as the Terran fleet drifted unseen through the black, the first human anthem in centuries played softly through the comm channels. It was an old song, one the survivors had carried since the fall of Earth. A song about home, loss, and endurance. Across every ship, people stopped their work to listen. The melody echoed through the cold corridors, haunting and beautiful. And somewhere far away, in the high towers of the Council, Lura sat by her window, looking at the same stars the humans were passing through. You're coming back, she whispered, her voice a mixture of dread and hope. And the galaxy isn't ready for you. In the endless dark, the humans pressed onward, shadows among stars, ghosts made of steel and grief. They were not returning as victims. They were returning as history's correction. And as the faint hum of their engines faded into the void, one truth became certain. The galaxy had watched Earth burn once, but this time, it would be the galaxy that trembled in the fire's light. The outer rim lay still, a vast ocean of darkness where light rarely reached and fewer dared to go. Among those forgotten stars, silence had always meant safety. But now, silence meant something else. It meant they were coming. In the deep black beyond the nebula divide, the Terran vanguard gathered. Dozens of colossal warships drifted through the void, their hulls blackened to swallow light, their engines whispering softly like the breath of sleeping giants. These ships were not remnants anymore. They were reborn titans, forged from ruin and memory. Where the old Terran fleet once stood as guardians, the vanguard now stood as ghosts returned from extinction. Every vessel bore the insignia of a world that no longer existed, yet each heartbeat inside carried its spirit. Humanity was back, unseen but everywhere. Aboard the TNS Revenant, Admiral Mason stood on the bridge, his hands resting on the railing as he looked at the growing formation outside. The stars reflected off his tired eyes, each spark reminding him of something lost and something still burning. Commander Ellis joined him quietly, holding a report. Phase 1 complete, Ellis said. Our strike teams secured 3 Dravik convoys and a council listening post. No survivors, no leaks. Mason didn't turn. And Phase 2? Ready, Ellis replied. The fleet awaits your word. Mason finally spoke, his voice steady and calm. Then we begin. No speeches. No warnings. Just silence. Below the command deck, the crew prepared. Soldiers checked weapons that had not been fired since Earth fell. Engineers powered engines older than their own bloodlines. Pilots sat in the cockpits of sleek interceptors, each one carrying a patch with the old Earth insignia. None of them had ever seen their home, but they carried it inside them. To them, Earth wasn't a place anymore. It was a promise, a fire that refused to die. The operation began under the cover of a dying star near the Vale cluster. The first target was not military, but symbolic, a massive Dravik trade station orbiting an uninhabited moon. It was here that the Council had once signed the Peace Charter, the same treaty that had sanctioned Earth's destruction. The irony was not lost on Mason. They celebrated our end here, he said softly. Let this be where their illusion begins to crumble. The fleet emerged from the dark like a storm without sound. Dozens of stealth cruisers surrounded the station in perfect formation. No alarms sounded. No sensors detected them. Within minutes, the station's systems froze. Lights flickered, gravity failed, and silence swallowed everything. In orbit, the Dravik commander watched in confusion as the stars blinked out one by one. Then the main screen came alive, and a human face appeared, Admiral Mason. His expression was calm, his voice colder than the void itself. You watched us burn, he said simply. Now watch the fire move. The transmission cut, and the station vanished in a flash of blue light. When the Council received the report hours later, the footage ended with the same phrase broadcast across all systems, Earth remembers. Panic swept through the chambers. Delegates shouted, accusing one another. The Chancellor demanded proof. It's a hoax, he said, though his trembling hands betrayed his words. But Lura, watching from the archives, knew better. She had seen the same signal months ago, hidden in the static. They are not ghosts, she whispered. They are coming home. Over the next weeks, chaos spread. Human strikes became precision art. Communication hubs, fuel depots, and weapons factories all vanished without a trace. Yet not a single civilian ship was harmed. The attacks were surgical, almost merciful. Humanity was not waging war. They were dismantling the foundations of the old order. The Council struggled to understand. Why not destroy us outright? One delegate asked. The Dravik ambassador hissed. Because they want us to watch. In the heart of the Council world, Lura worked in secret. She had begun decoding more of the old Terran signals that now flooded the outer channels. Each one carried fragments of human voices, names, coordinates, pieces of history once erased. She realized the truth. The humans weren't just attacking, they were broadcasting their memory. Every strike reawakened a story. Every destroyed base carried a message from the past. Humanity was rewriting history through the ashes of its enemies. They are forcing us to remember, she said one night, recording her thoughts. Every world that cheered their end will now feel what it means to witness them rise. Back aboard the Revenant, Mason gathered his senior officers in the war room. The holographic map showed hundreds of Council systems glowing in red. They'll call us monsters again, Ellis said quietly. Mason looked at him. Then they'll finally be right, he replied. But not because we're cruel, because they made us learn what mercy costs. He turned to his crew. The next target is Council Command Relay 9, near the Galactic Core. Once we take it, they'll lose their central communication. From that moment, they'll be deaf. His tone softened slightly. We don't destroy the core. We take it intact. They'll hear us when we're ready. When the fleet arrived, the Council's finest defenses waited, massive cruisers, planetary cannons, and patrol ships armed with alien technology. But they never saw the humans coming. The vanguard slipped through their detection grids like wind through glass. The first shot came from nowhere. A flash of light cut through the void, and the largest Council battleship split in half. The others followed, weapons firing blindly into the dark. The Terran ships danced between them, unseen, untouchable. "They're everywhere," shouted one alien captain. "They are not," another screamed back. "They are nowhere." Within hours, Relay 9 was silent. When the Council tried to re-establish contact, they received a single transmission, a visual feed showing the Terran flag rising over the captured station. And behind it, the human anthem played softly, hauntingly, across the stars. Every channel, every frequency carried the same sound. It was not a declaration of war. It was a reminder. On Concordia Prime, the Council gathered in emergency session. The Chancellor's face was pale. "We must negotiate," he said. Admiral Koro slammed his fist against the table. "Negotiate with ghosts? They won't talk, they'll finish us." "And if they don't?" Lura said suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise. The chamber turned toward her. "What if they only want us to see?" The Chancellor frowned. "See what?" "What we did," she said softly. "What we became." Meanwhile, far beyond their reach, the human fleet regrouped near a newborn star. Mason watched from his bridge as the light washed over the hull of the Revenant. "They'll finally start to understand," Ellis said beside him. "No," Mason replied. "Understanding comes last. First comes fear." His voice was quiet, almost sorrowful. "And then, when the fear fades, they'll remember what we were before they tried to erase us." As the fleet drifted through the glowing dust of the new star, hundreds of messages from across the galaxy poured in. Worlds once ruled by the Council now reaching out to the humans. Some pleaded for protection, others for alliance. A few, surprisingly, for forgiveness. Mason read them all, but answered none. "We don't rule," he said to Ellis. "We rebuild. We remind." He looked back at the stars. "And when they're ready to listen, we'll tell them what Earth truly was." In the halls of the Council, panic turned into something else, realization. The humans were not trying to destroy civilization. They were reshaping it. Every strike, every silence, every echo carried the same message: we are still here. And in that quiet truth, the galaxy began to understand what the Dravik, the Council, and even history itself had forgotten. Humanity's greatest weapon was never its firepower. It was its endurance. On the Revenant's observation deck, Mason stood alone as the stars drifted by. He closed his eyes and whispered the old words that had carried his people through every dark age, every storm, every silence. Earth stands. Then, opening his eyes to the endless sky, he added softly, "And now the galaxy will." The galaxy that once called itself safe had become a place of trembling light and deep shadows. Every system that once boasted of the Council's authority now whispered of the Terrans. Traders spoke of unseen fleets passing near their routes. Soldiers muttered of empty outposts and vanished armadas. Planets that had once mocked humanity now prayed never to see them. The Council had gone from celebration to fear in less than a year. And as they hid behind their walls of diplomacy, far beyond their reach, humanity prepared for something greater than revenge. They prepared for reckoning. In the cold expanse between stars, the TNS Revenant hung silent, its massive form barely visible against the void. Inside, Admiral Mason stood before the war table, the holographic projection of the galaxy burning in blue light. Hundreds of red marks blinked: Council fleets, trade networks, fortified worlds. Each one pulsed like a heartbeat, and each one, Mason knew, was now within reach. Around him, his senior officers waited in silence. "We've struck fear," Mason said quietly. "But fear fades. It's time they understand." Commander Ellis spoke, voice steady but uncertain. "Sir, if we go further, there's no turning back. This won't be warning anymore. It'll be war." Mason looked up, his face carved from exhaustion and conviction. It already was war. We just stopped pretending it wasn't. The plan was simple in design but devastating in meaning. Humanity would strike the Dravic Empire first, the same species that had led the destruction of Earth under the Council's permission. But this time, there would be no fire raining down on cities. The Terrans didn't aim for planets. They aimed for power. One by one, the orbital shipyards, command centers, and supply networks that fed the Dravic war machine were targeted. The humans moved with surgical precision, disabling weapons, cutting communications, then leaving nothing but silence. Within days, the entire Dravic defense grid collapsed without a single civilian casualty. The galaxy had never seen a war fought with such restraint, and yet such devastating clarity. When the Dravic High Council tried to call for aid, their message reached the Galactic Council chamber too late. The broadcast flickered through the Great Hall, images of cities shrouded in fog, skies filled with human ships that never fired but never retreated either. A voice spoke through the static. "We remember." The Dravic Emperor shouted into the comms, "They won't speak to us. They just watch." The Chancellor turned pale. Around the chamber, delegates whispered, their voices trembling. "It's them," one said. "The ghosts." "No," said another, "not ghosts. Consequence." At that same moment, on the bridge of the Revenant, Mason stood at the viewport, watching the Dravic capital below. Its surface glittered with lights, unaware of the silent storm above. "Targeting grid locked," Ellis reported. "No resistance detected." "We're not here to destroy them," Mason replied. "Broadcast to every channel, council, civilian, military." A technician nodded, and the transmission went out across the stars. Mason stepped forward, his voice carrying through the silence of the void. "This is Admiral Mason of the Terran Vanguard. We will not fire upon the innocent. We will not destroy your worlds. We will not become what you made us. But we will remind you. You watched Earth burn. You celebrated its fall. You called it peace. Now you'll see what peace built from ashes looks like." The broadcast reached every corner of the galaxy. On distant worlds, alien citizens stopped in their streets to watch. In the council chamber, the Chancellor stood frozen as Mason's face filled every holographic screen. "You called us dangerous," Mason said. "You were right. But not because we destroy. Because we endure." Then the screen went dark. Moments later, the Dravic defense network shut down completely, not from human weapons, but from inside. Their AI cores, infected with a Terran code planted years before the war, deactivated every weapon and shield. Within hours, the once mighty Dravic fleet drifted powerless in orbit, unable to move, unable to fight. And then the humans left. No fire, no conquest, just silence and humiliation. 4 days, the Council tried to respond. Admiral Koro ordered fleets to pursue the Terrans, but they never found them. The humans seemed to vanish as easily as they appeared. When Council scouts reached the edge of the Veil cluster, they found something unexpected, a planet. Not Earth, but something new. Metallic continents, shining cities, and a single name etched across its equator large enough to be seen from orbit, New Earth. The sight spread across the galaxy like a pulse of fear and awe. Humanity had not just survived, they had rebuilt. And they had done it faster than any species in recorded history. On Concordia Prime, riots broke out. Citizens questioned why the Council had lied, why they allowed Earth to fall. The Chancellor gave speech after speech about containment and diplomatic control, but no one listened anymore. The people saw through it. Even species that had once supported Earth's destruction began to question themselves. And through it all, a quiet rumor spread that the humans had technology the Council couldn't understand, ships that moved faster than light, weapons that didn't use fire but gravity itself. None of it was confirmed, but the fear was enough. Back aboard the Revenant, Mason stood in the observation bay, watching as New Earth's oceans glimmered in the distance. "It's beautiful," said Dr. Lena Hart softly beside him. "Almost makes you forget what it cost." Mason nodded, his voice low. "We didn't build it to forget. We built it to remember differently. He turned to her, eyes heavy with thought. Do you think they'll ever understand? She smiled faintly. Maybe not today. But someday, when they look up at that planet, they'll realize the truth. You can't erase what refuses to die. The following weeks reshaped the galaxy. Dozens of smaller civilizations that had once bent to the councils began to align with the Terrans. They called it the Alliance of Ashes, a coalition of worlds that had suffered under the council's arrogance. Humanity did not lead them through force. They led through example. They rebuilt what others had lost. They shared technology freely, something no council race had ever done. For the first time in centuries, the balance of the galaxy shifted, not through conquest, but through cooperation forged by fear and respect. In the council's great chamber, the chancellor looked across the faces of his peers. We cannot destroy them, he admitted finally. We must face them. Admiral Koro leaned forward, his jaw tight. And what do we say to the species we condemned? The chancellor hesitated, then said softly, we say, nothing. We listen. That night, Lura walked through the city of Concordia, the once bright skyline now dimmed by uncertainty. She looked up at the stars and found one that shone brighter than the rest, a pale blue spark near the edge of the void. She smiled sadly. You came back, she whispered. But not to conquer. To remind us what we lost when we stopped being brave. Meanwhile, deep within New Earth's core, Mason stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Towers rose like blades of glass against the dark sky. Ships glided silently above, carrying people who had never seen the old Earth but carried its memory in their blood. Sir, Ellis said, stepping beside him. The council sent a request for dialogue. Mason didn't answer immediately. He watched the horizon, where a faint glow of dawn began to rise. We'll answer, he said at last. But not today. Ellis hesitated. When then? Mason smiled faintly. When they remember how to speak as equals. The sun rose slowly over New Earth, its light washing over the steel plains and glass cities. Somewhere above, the remains of 1,000 council ships drifted in silence, monuments to arrogance and amnesia. Humanity didn't need to destroy them. They had already done that to themselves. As the light touched the Revenant's hull, Mason whispered the words that had carried his species across centuries of loss and fire. From ashes, we rise. And from silence, we speak. The message went unbroadcast. It didn't need to be. The galaxy already knew. Humanity had returned, not as conquerors, but as a mirror. And when the stars looked back, they saw themselves in that reflection. They saw what they had done. They saw what they had feared. They saw the reason they would never forget the name of the world they burned, nor the people who walked out of its fire stronger than before. Humanity's reckoning was not destruction. It was revelation. And the echo of it would be written in every corner of the cosmos. Earth stands. Earth endures. Earth remembers the galaxy slept uneasily in the wake of what had come to be known as the silence of the Council. Their fleets were broken, their arrogance shattered, their certainties gone. Across thousands of worlds, the old order that had ruled for centuries now whispered of one name, Earth. In markets, in academies, in the depths of space stations, the story spread like wildfire. Humanity had returned, not as conquerors, but as the mirror of truth, showing every species what it meant to endure. The stars had seen war before, but never like this, never fought through restraint, never won through remembrance. Humanity had burned once, and from that ash, they had learned to control the flame. On New Earth, dawn rose over silver towers and ocean mirrors. The capital city, Ardent Prime, hummed softly beneath the sun, filled with people whose ancestors had known only exile and fear. Now they walked freely beneath banners of blue and white, the emblem of Earth gleaming above every port and embassy. In the grand hall of the Revenant Tower, Admiral Mason addressed a gathering of leaders, soldiers, engineers, diplomats, and survivors who had carried the dream of humanity through the dark centuries. We are no longer what we were, Mason said, his voice quiet but steady. The galaxy thought they ended us. What they did was teach us who we are. We don't need their forgiveness, and we don't need their fear. What we build now will outlast both. Commander Ellis stood at his side, watching the holographic map of the galaxy rotate slowly before them. Red markers had faded. Blue lights, symbolizing peace accords and new colonies, spread outward from New Earth like veins of light across the dark. "The Council's envoy is on their way," Ellis said softly. "Do we receive them?" Mason took a long breath, his gaze distant. "Yes. Let them come. The era of silence is over." When the envoy arrived, they came not in a fleet of gold-trimmed cruisers, but in a single transport ship, small, cautious, humble. The Chancellor himself disembarked, escorted by guards who looked more frightened than proud. The air shimmered with tension as Mason stepped forward to greet him. "Admiral Mason," the Chancellor said, his tone uncertain, his arrogance gone. "Humanity has done the impossible. You've rebuilt what no species could have." Mason nodded slightly. "We didn't rebuild to impress you. We rebuilt because we had to." The Chancellor hesitated, then asked, "What happens now?" Mason studied him in silence for a long moment before replying. "Now, you remember." They walked through the Hall of Memory, its walls filled with recordings and artifacts from Earth's history. The first flight, the first colony, the first war, the first loss. At the end of the hall stood a window overlooking the horizon, where the sun touched the sea. "You called us dangerous," Mason said. "And you were right. We're dangerous because we feel. Because we remember. Because we hope even when hope is gone. You burned our home, but you couldn't burn that." The Chancellor's eyes fell, shame written in every line of his face. "And if we ask for peace?" Mason's voice softened. "Peace isn't something you ask for. It's something you prove." Outside, the Terran fleet stood silent in orbit, thousands of ships watching the world below like guardians of a promise. They bore no insignia of conquest, only the mark of Earth. A white circle on blue, the symbol of unity. Humanity had become what the galaxy never imagined. A force that ruled not through dominance, but through memory, through justice, through balance. Weeks later, the Council officially dissolved its old charter, forming a new one, the Galactic Accord of Renewal. And at its heart stood humanity, not as rulers, but as witnesses. Lura was there, standing beside Mason as representatives from across the stars signed the new peace. She looked up at him and whispered, "They feared us once." Mason smiled faintly. "They still do. But now, maybe they'll respect what they fear." That night, celebrations filled the cities of New Earth. Children born among the stars danced under artificial rain, laughing at a sky that no longer frightened them. Elders told stories of the old Earth, of the fire that had once consumed everything and the light that followed. And high above, the Revenant drifted quietly in orbit, its engines cold, its mission complete. Mason stood on the bridge one last time, looking at the blue planet below. "We kept the promise," Ellis said softly. "We did," Mason replied. "And we'll keep it until the stars forget our name." As dawn broke once more, the galaxy looked toward New Earth not with scorn, but with awe. The humans who had once been erased from history had become its authors again. The same species that had been abandoned to die had returned to teach the stars what survival truly meant. Humanity had not just endured, they had redefined existence itself. And in that quiet, endless space between worlds, one final message pulsed through every frequency, every relay, every forgotten corner of the cosmos. It carried no threat, no anger, only truth. "We are humanity. We were the fire you feared. We were the silence you forgot. We are the echo you still hear in the dark. And we stand." The signal faded, but its meaning never would. Across the stars, countless species paused, listening to the heartbeat of a world reborn. The Council's era had ended. The age of humanity had begun. And as the light of New Earth spread across the void, the galaxy finally understood what those who had watched Earth burn could never comprehend. Fire doesn't die in darkness. It waits. It learns. It remembers.